I'm just thrilled to be joined today with by Joe McCambley, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Saatva. Um, Joe has, I guess, I don't know who's leading whom at this point. Let's just call it hand in hand. We've taken Saatva on a journey over the last about 18 months that really felt like we wanted to share not only the what we did and what we learned, but a little bit of the how we did it. And as a result of that, as Dave mentioned, we've got just a couple of slides that'll support the discussion, but this will still look and feel a lot like most of your CMO Club summits. There won't be a lot of presentation or lecturing. Please do interject if you've got any questions or comments, observations, war stories, the same scars in the same places. We'll be happy to talk through a lot of those. But to get things kicked off, Joe McCambley is just going to start us with a little bit of a discussion about who Saatva is, kind of what the origin story is, and what some of the challenges that he was facing that kicked off this whole stream of work, this journey, as it were.
Great, thank you, Joe, and thank you everybody for having me here today. I really have been looking forward to the chance to share some learnings with you all. So I'm the CMO at Saatva. I grew up as a creative person in advertising. I started my career about 40 years ago as a copywriter and have moved through different agencies as chief creative officer. So I'm a big believer in storytelling. But I just have to tell you all that some of the learnings that I've had working with Joe and Sentient over the past year and a half or so have challenged my conventional wisdom in so many ways. So I've always been a big believer in storyteller, but I haven't always been a big believer in using data to tell stories. And I have learned from Joe and from Sentient that data can be a powerful partner when it comes to telling great stories. So Saatva. Saatva was the first mattress brand to sell mattresses direct to consumers online at scale. So there were a couple of others that did that before us, but we were the first ones to sell luxury mattresses online in a very big way. And we started doing that in 2010. At the time, we were intent on building a strong, profitable business. So when we invested, it was in our customer 24/7 customer service capabilities. We built a logistics network that put us within 50 miles of anybody who lives in the lower 48 states so that we could deliver our mattresses by hand and take away your old mattress. When we were the only game in town selling mattresses online, so there was very little need for differentiation. We didn't really do any awareness building because if you were predisposed toward buying a mattress online, you were probably going to go online and search Google for a mattress term like what's the best mattress in Austin, Texas. And because nobody else was really advertising through paid search about mattresses, you were likely to find us. So for much of our early history, we focused on performance marketing, what we call performance marketing, Google search, Bing search. Also, mattress recommendation and review sites were very important to us. We did no advertising in the upper funnel or virtually no advertising in the upper funnel. We really spent our time talking to people who were in market for a mattress. And we didn't think it was important to talk to you if you were not in market for a mattress because you might not buy for 10 years. I mean, that's about how often people buy mattresses. Then in about 2015 to 2017, about 200, what we would call bed-in-the-box mattress brands started to sell mattresses online. So we don't compress our mattresses, we don't fold them, we don't put them in boxes, we don't mail them to our customers. Everything is made whole, delivered whole. It's meant to be kind of a luxurious experience. But in 2015 to 2017, brands like Casper, Purple, Lisa, Nectar, Tuft & Needle, brands that you may all have heard of, started to sell mattresses online. And while their products were very different from ours, they still called them mattresses. So if you did a search for a mattress on Google, as of 2017, rather than only getting an ad from Saatva, you are more likely to get an ad from any of 200 brands that were advertising online. still we continued to grow, but by about 2017, 2018, there was so much competition for search terms in Google search and so much competition with our affiliates that our margins started to get compressed. Then, we started to get an inkling then that we were going to have to do something different, but then COVID hit in 2020. And when COVID hit, millions of mattress shoppers who would normally buy at a brick and mortar store had no other choice but to buy online. So maybe for the first 2 or 3 weeks of COVID, our business really took a major hit. But then after about 3 weeks, there was pent-up demand. People started to come in and started to shop online, and our business picked up again. And as most of you know, when revenue is good, when profitability is good, it masks other problems, or you choose not to pay attention to them because business is good, right? So what we saw, though, is that in maybe May of 2020, business really took off for us. And by the end of 2020, we started to think, wow, when May 2021 comes, that COVID effect is going to wear off and our growth is going to stop, that year-over-year growth. And we knew that if we were going to continue to grow after May of 2021, we would have to do something different. So that's when we realized that we may need to move up the funnel as a way of differentiating ourselves with other brands. So what we learned through COVID was that, when people did a search for a mattress brand, they were very, very likely to still encounter Saatva, because if we have a superpower, it's paid search and affiliate marketing. So I would say that if you did a search for a mattress term anytime in 2020 or 2021, there's about an 80% probability that you were going to discover us. But what we learned through COVID is that while more people were discovering us, our conversion rates weren't going up, which told us that awareness wasn't our problem. Anybody that was in market for a mattress in 2020 or early part of 2021 was being made aware of Saatva on some level. But because they didn't have any kind of predisposed beliefs about us, they had no way of differentiating us from other brands. And as a CMO, I have to tell you, I started to get scared in about October and November of 2020, realizing that there was going to be this comeuppance in May, and we better start doing something different. So differentiation became important, and we knew that we had to make people believe something about us, but we had very strong feelings about who we were and what we stood for. But we really didn't know if that message was getting through on any level, because we were advertising at such a low level in the funnel. So we knew that we had to gain an understanding of consumers and what they believed about us and what was important to them. Up to that point, really most of our consumer research was done using Google surveys. We would, when somebody bought from us on our site, we would put a survey in front of them. And we'd ask them things like, how did you hear about Saatva? And we saw that a large percentage of people would say, oh, I heard about Saatva through their TV advertising, when we had never advertised on TV. So we realized that things like Google surveys, or asking people what they thought or what they felt or what they believed, was not going to be as reliable as looking at their behavior and trying to learn from their behavior. So that was when we first did some research to see who could help us actually look at, or help us uncover what people actually believe, not just what they said. And that's kind of how we first were introduced to Joe Sauer and Sentient. Joe, I hope I didn't talk too long there.
Absolutely not. I could listen to you talk forever. So I think what Joe's describing really is what we call in the research industry evidence of the can't say, won't say problem, or the won't say, can't say problem in research. Most participants in quantitative survey research, it's not their first rodeo. They've been through, at least one survey in the past. And the whole process of answering questions that are being put to you, either from a live agent on the telephone or virtually on a web survey, is a very hazardous experience. You're painfully aware that you're providing insight into who you are and how you feel, how you think, what you like, what you're likely to do in the future. And as a result of that, there is a very natural human tendency to provide response data that represents an idealized version of yourself. I learned this very early on in my career as a researcher when I was doing research into media properties, and realized that only about 1% of the population had ever watched The Simpsons or claimed to ever watch The Simpsons, and about 99% of the public had actually claimed to watch A&E Biography on a regular basis. One of them was kind of this lowbrow programming, one was highbrow, and so if you admitted that you watched The Simpsons, much less that you liked The Simpsons, it actually revealed something about yourself that a lot of people were uncomfortable with. And so that kind of natural tendency is what we call the won't say problem. Traditional research questions, traditionally formulated questions, give respondents an opportunity to really reflect about their answer. And as a result, you're getting responses that are filtered through a whole series of biases. This is generating data that we call explicit or conscious data. It's that reflective, logical, kind of goal-oriented thought process. And so that's what the phenomenon that Joe was encountering with some of the survey approaches that he was using at the time. The other part of that problem, the can't say part of the problem, we know that what happens in response to any kind of stimulus, and shopping is a multi-sensory experience. It's full of sensory inputs into our brains. Our response to those sensory experiences creates emotional responses in our brains, in our neural pathways. And those emotional responses actually have a tremendous influence over our preferences, our choices, and ultimately the behavior that we display in the real world. And yet, traditional research techniques, again, because they give you the opportunity to think about your answer, and are, as a result, are only really isolating conscious thought processes, aren't giving enough weight, if you will, to what's happening on a subconscious basis. In fact, if you just think about the etymology of the word subconscious, sub means beneath, conscious means aware. So a lot of these thought processes are beneath our level of awareness that they're actually happening. This is why, after decades of price experimentation, diamond merchants will price a 1 carat stone at about 2 times the cost of a 0.9 carat stone, even though to the naked eye, those stones are actually completely identical. It's the reason why good shopping merchandisers put chocolate bars at the end of the checkout process rather than in the aisle, because they know that that's where I'm going to be at my weakest in terms of impulse buying, because I'm bored and just waiting to get through the checkout line. And so we need, if we're going to get at kind of the full version of the truth, what we really need is some way to isolate and quantify what's happening on a subconscious basis, as opposed to a conscious basis. And that's really where this family of what we call neuro-based research techniques comes into play. The oldest and kind of most venerable research techniques that incorporate neuro-based data are, largely speaking, what we call neurometric techniques. These are things like electroencephalography and functional magnetic resonance imaging. They are techniques that measure brain activity directly. And because they're measuring brain activity directly, there's this perception that they provide super accurate data. And to a certain extent, they do. They provide really accurate data about what's happening in your brain in response to this visual stimulus or this multisensory stimulus. The problem with neurometric techniques from a marketing research perspective is that they just aren't scalable. They involve a considerable amount of time and cost. And because of the need to actually be physically co-located with the researcher, they involve sampling bias as well. This idea that I'm only talking to people who are willing to come into a facility and have this gel put across my head before this electrode cap is put on, or slid into this tube that actually pings at me every couple of seconds. And so although they're very accurate in terms of imaging the brain activity directly, they sacrifice a lot of that utility in terms of a reduction in accuracy through sampling bias and the simple sheer cost and time it takes to execute those studies. As a result of that, the research industry has kind of moved on to the next best thing, the next greatest thing. And these were, as a family, called biometric techniques. They weren't measuring brain activity directly, so not neurometrics, but they were measuring the biological manifestation of brain activity. So measuring things like your heart rate. We know that your heart rate will tend to increase in moments where your emotions are aroused. Skin conductance resonance, where we know that the moisture on your skin will increase in measurable ways if your emotions are aroused. And so biometric techniques, because they aren't quite as expensive as neurometric techniques, are a little bit more scalable. They sacrifice a little bit of that accuracy because they're measuring physiological manifestation of brain activity instead of brain activity directly, but they are more scalable for marketing research purposes. However, they still do require, in general, mostly, some sort of sensor to be applied to your body to measure these biometric responses. And as a result, they also involve the kind of sampling bias that neurometric techniques do. There are really two exceptions to that in the area of biometric techniques that have come a long way in terms of technology. And these are facial action coding and eye tracking. These can now be done online with consumer grade electronic equipment that most people have at their disposal in either a desktop or a laptop computer or a tablet or a mobile phone in some way, shape, or form. And we make heavy use of both eye tracking and facial action coding in a lot of our work. What we are actually known most for in the industry is pioneering the application of a cognitive psychology, or rather a social psychology methodology to the field of marketing research. It's called implicit association testing. What implicit association testing does is isolate and quantify emotional response using a gamified psychology experiment. Respondents don't have control over their response data in the way that they do with traditional surveys, because we're actually measuring their response time, how quickly they answer questions. We're also in this game trying to introduce what we call cognitive dissonance, this idea that what's happening on a subconscious basis is actually directly in conflict with what's going on a conscious basis in my brain. And to the extent that that conflict exists, it will take me longer to actually arrive at the correct answer in each stage of the experiment. In the interest of time, I won't go into implicit association research from a methodological perspective, but certainly happy to discuss that at greater length with anybody that's got the time and the inclination. But what implicit association experimentation did was give us the opportunity to identify what it was about Saatva that could actually influence consumer preferences, choice, and ultimately brand attachment, which sounded a lot
Joe,
like what Joe wanted to do.
Yeah. Joe, I'm sorry, but I know that you didn't want to go into the details, but I'm going to ask you to, because I think it's an important component. So everybody who's watching now just kind of experienced the first time I ever met Joe and heard his pitch. And so much of what I heard makes logical sense. But we got off the call and I turned around to my team and I just said, what the hell did he just say? Like, what the hell did he say? And there was a woman who worked as part of our team that introduced us to Joe, who swears by the Sentient methodology. And she was talking about implicit assumption. I said, all right, I know what implicit means. I know what assumption means. I don't know what those two words mean when you put them together. Just give me an example. And so Joe, I'm going to butcher your methodology. This
Absolutely.
is only a very, very small sliver of it, but I think it will help people understand. So on a mobile phone, you will put some sort of a visual or verbal stimulus in front of a consumer. And you tell them, if you agree with this, or if you like this, swipe toward you. If you disagree with this, or if you don't like this, swipe away from you. And you know how visceral the emotional response is based on how quickly the consumer swipes toward them or away from them. And if there's a hesitation, you know that there's an emotional hesitation. Maybe they don't feel as strongly as they might tell you they feel about certain things, or they may not be so ambivalent as they tell you they are about certain things. So when my teammate put it within that context, I thought, okay, well that sounds really like simple. I guess it works. Until you see it in action, you'll completely underestimate how powerful this methodology is. I just wanted to make sure that this gets out there because, like I said, you kind of have to experience it for yourself and feel what the consumer is feeling as they go through the research to understand or to get an inkling that this works. Sorry, Joe, go ahead.
No, not at all. I was actually going to turn it back over to you to talk about.
Oh, you were? Okay, good. Right. Yeah. So using not like that's not the only methodology, but using similar methodologies, we embarked on trying to discover what our value proposition should be. What should we be saying to consumers when they're out of market for a mattress, in the upper funnel, so that when they eventually came and searched for a mattress-related term, they might believe something about us. So we weren't looking to replace our search marketing or our affiliate marketing efforts with television advertising, say. What we were looking to do is to create the kind of messaging in the upper funnel that would make our performance marketing more effective, twice or 3 or 4 times more effective than it was, by having people arrive at search with some sort of preconceived notion about us. So as we did this research, we learned things like, what are the product features on a product by product basis that are most important to consumers. We learned how much they felt our products were worth, and that gave us some great insights into price elasticity. We learned how they perceive sales and discounts, and how much of a discount could be too high of a discount, or how much of a sale could be too low of a sale. We learned what kinds of brands that people wanted to be associated with, and how our best customers perceived us as a brand. And it was when we talked to past customers that it kind of threw us into a quandary, because our past customers told us that we could own things like comfort and reliability and durability and ease of purchase. But our original value proposition when we started the company was we literally went out and took and purchased a number of high-end competitor mattresses. We took them apart. We did a materials analysis, and we figured out that we could make a high-end luxury mattress for about $1,500 to $2,000 less than our competitors who sell them in brick and mortar stores, because we didn't have brick and mortar stores, because we didn't pay sales commissions, leases, heating, lighting, and things like that. We could sell a high-end product for less. So we really thought that when we did the research, that consumers would come back and tell us that we were a great value, and they didn't tell us that. We weren't associated with value at all. And in fact, what we learned from the research is that when we looked at about 20 different brands in the space, the ones that we think are our biggest competitors, nobody owned value. So we dug a little bit deeper, and we learned that the way that we define value was very different from the way our best customers define value. So you have to understand what our best customers are like, and this is also something that came out of the research. We learned that our best customers and our most loyal customers will shop between 7 and 10 different brands. So and they'll typically look at, maybe half the brands they look at will be brick and mortar brands like Sealy, Serta, Simmons, Stearns and Foster, and the other half will be bed in the box brands, brands that are sold online: Casper, Purple, Lisa, Nectar, Tufton, Needham. And when they do their shopping, they'll often have 8 to 10 tabs open on their browser. They'll be bouncing around different brand sites. They're building spreadsheets, and they are comparing different mattresses and different brands on a feature by feature basis. They're really doing their homework. And when they decide to buy from us, it's as important that we make them feel comfortable paying less for us. So our mattress might cost $1,500 less than a Stearns and Foster. And that can lead a consumer to look at our mattress and say, oh, it must be garbage. How could they sell it for so much less? So our customers define value, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this. I'll try to clarify it. Our customers have the ability to pay more for a mattress, but they choose not to. They can afford nice things, but they want to find the best price for the best product, and they want to feel good about it. And feeling good about it means I have to feel good about spending $1,500 less for a high-end mattress, but it also means I have to feel good about spending a little bit more for a Saatva than I would for a bed-in-a-box brand. So value meant confidence to the consumer. I want to feel confident in the price I'm paying. I don't want to feel like I'm getting a good deal. I don't want to get a big discount. I want to feel really good about the product I buy because I did my research. I did a feature by feature comparison. I trust this brand, and I'm going to buy from them. So there was a lot to unpack there. We literally had 2 to 3 months of discussions around what is value and how do consumers define value. We did a lot of creative testing to understand better what value type messages consumers would respond to best. And through that research, we landed upon a definition, maybe a persona. We call our customers research junkies. They do their homework. They understand different mattress brands and different mattress products and different mattress features, and they make a smart decision, and they feel good about the price they pay. Thanks, Joe.
That's great. Again, just in keeping with this.
Hey, Joe, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry. I just wanted to interrupt you guys real quick. I had a question. When you talked about how you work with Sentient and you started doing more, I guess, TV advertising and upper funnel advertising, and how that made your search advertising and your affiliate marketing more effective. Did you take findings and incorporate them into, say, keyword buys or ad copy to make it more effective, or was it more of just creating a larger, a wider funnel at the top with all of that work you were doing?
That is such a great question, Dave. So
I used to manage paid search for Salesforce, so I think about it. But anyways,
yeah, you know what we learned through a lot of the research, and some of this research is done with other organizations. Even believe it or not, we have other organizations that we work with that aren't named Sentient. Sorry, Joe. We learned that we'd had to have different goals for our upper funnel and our lower funnel advertising. So for us, for instance, with our upper funnel advertising, we built a marketing mix model, and we're not using revenue or conversions or even profitability to judge the veracity of the different channels we use. For the upper funnel, we're looking at, are we making people do branded searches for Saatva? That's how we've tied our marketing mix model. Because we know, again, through other research, that as search for Saatva, branded searches for Saatva increases, after about a certain lag time, our market share also goes up. So the first thing we looked at from a performance standpoint was, are more people searching for our brand? And of course, it costs us much less to choose branded or to support branded keywords than non-branded keywords. And our conversion rates are much better for branded keywords than non-branded keywords. So that was the first way that we wanted to make our search marketing more effective. And then the second thing we looked at in the lower funnel was, as we invest in upper funnel advertising, do our conversion rates improve in the lower funnel? And what, for non-branded search terms. And what we learned there is that there's a lag. So as you're hitting people sooner or earlier in their mattress journey, they're not ready to convert yet. So for the first couple of months after you do upper funnel advertising, you're going to see a depression in your conversion rates in paid search. But eventually, as those people start to make their decisions and make their purchase decisions, you'll see your conversion rates rebound and start to climb again. So the purpose of the upper funnel advertising was to predispose people toward believing that we could do good for them. But sometimes we were hitting them so early in their shopping journey that it took them longer to convert, which short-term depress the conversion rates. I hope I answered your question, Dave.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, in keeping with that, the how we actually got to that point was being very systematic about identifying some truths about the brand and using those truths to develop brand narratives that we could apply at different parts of the funnel. So Dave's question actually, is a perfect segue into this type of thinking. The first thing that we started with was essentially using that implicit association testing that I mentioned earlier to quantify the strength of the association between Saatva and a handful of key competitors and a set of brand attributes or traits or characteristics, if you will. And we started with about 50 attributes. And we actually started with about 20 and we expanded it out to 50. And what we really were able to understand was that other than low price, which was the one attribute outside of the circle here, there was a lot that was actually true about the Saatva brand. A lot of attributes could be used to accurately characterize or describe the Saatva brand. And of course, that's not the end of the story, because we then need to know, well, in your search for differentiation, of those attributes that are true about the brand, which of them are actually ownable by the brand? And so again, we use this same type of analytical approach to compare the strength of association on these 49 attributes for Saatva versus its key competitors, both at the entry level bed in a box kind of folks, as well as the higher end, more traditional manufacturers. And so what we identified out of those 49 attributes or 50 attributes that we started with is that there were only 13 that were both true about the brand and ownable by the brand. Unfortunately, this is where most of your brand trackers stop, right? This is what differentiates our brand in the marketplace. So let's go out and build narratives around these attributes. We actually added a final step, and that is to determine of these 13 attributes that are both true about the brand and ownable by the brand, which of them actually have the highest correlation to choice, so brand preference and brand attachment. And once you add that layer in, you move from 50 attributes at the top, if you will, to 8 attributes. And when you look at what those 8 attributes actually are, there are natural clusters, natural groupings of those 8 attributes that lead to the development of brand narratives. And those brand narratives get incorporated into the marketing communications, whether it's short form digital and social advertising, whether it's hero banners, whether it's SEM, SEO, whether it's top of the funnel, kind of more broadcast TV type advertising. And by taking these 8 attributes and then cutting them based on where the respondent was in their journey, their mattress shopping journey, we could understand how the narrative has to change as you proceed from the top of the funnel to the middle part of the funnel, finally to closure at the end of the funnel. And so this triage, if you will, that we did on all of the attributes that could potentially describe the brand allowed us to develop funnel specific narratives that got incorporated into marketing communications at every stage of the funnel in really compelling ways. And we knew that we had this final step of value perceptions, meaning there's a high correlation to the decision or the behavior that each customer is going through at each stage of the funnel. So the key then was to make sure that these brand narratives actually got integrated really effectively into the advertising. And that was kind of the final piece of the puzzle that Joe had to deal with.
And what was so important to us, you could tell, like Joe said, we looked at 49 or 50 attributes and there was truth to all of them because we spent 10 years trying to build the best company we possibly could. But when you look at what our customers valued most and what the right consumers valued most, as far as the upper funnel was concerned, there were 8 things that we should use or topics that we should use to start our conversation with them. We were talking about 50 things to consumers when there was only 8 things that they were ready to talk about in the upper funnel. And those other elements, those 41 or 42 other truths about our brand, we still talk about them, but we talk about them at different points in the funnel. As consumers move down the funnel, they grow more rational. And those other truths are things that we talk when they're ready to hear about them. Do you need a box spring when you're buying this mattress? That's the lowest possible funnel conversation you can have with the consumer in the mattress space. You don't want to be talking about that to them too soon because they're not going to pay attention to you. So not only did the Sentient research inform how we were going to get people to stop in their tracks and pay attention to us when they were in the upper funnel, it also gave us really insights into what our narrative should be and how we should structure the narrative. Not that the narrative happens in a linear fashion, but it almost happens in linear fashion when you're going from emotional to rational.
Great. So Joe and his team actually developed a series of ads that could be used both in digital social platforms as well as in a larger kind of broadcast TV buy. And the challenge was then to understand which of those ads we should actually run at which stage of the funnel. And so the approach that we used to support that decision was very similar in nature to the work that we've described up until this point. Again, so no surprise to anyone on the call, it really revolved around these biometric and implicit association research techniques. What we found as we started to look specifically at advertising effectiveness assessments is that historically they had evolved kind of over time by well-intentioned clients asking well-intentioned researchers questions about the performance of their ads. Not quite as naive as kind of the Wanamaker dilemma of knowing that half your spend on advertising is wasted, you just don't know which half. But certainly really trying to get to the core of what makes an effective ad. And so as a CMO or a head of brand or head of advertising wanted to know how memorable is my ad or how memorable is my brand after people are exposed to my ad. These well-intentioned researchers went away and wrote up some questions that ostensibly answered that type of question. And then the CMO would say, well, how persuasive is my ad? And so the researchers went away and wrote up another couple of questions. And the problem with executing or building research programs in that way is that there's no link to behavior. You're not building your approach, your evaluation approach, on a scientifically validated behavioral principle or behavioral theory. And so when we started to get into the ad effectiveness game about a decade ago, we went, as the scientific zealots of the industry, we went back to the science and said, what is the most appropriate scientifically validated behavioral principle or behavioral model that we can apply to advertising simply by adapting the measurement techniques that we use to validate the model. And what we came up with was a well-established theory model called the theory of persuasion. And it really applies effectively to advertising, again, regardless of the platform and regardless of the stage that the creative is developed to. This same approach works with storyboards as well as with Final Cut video and every stage in between. And essentially, the theory of persuasion consists of 4 different pillars. The first 2 pillars are really what we call process pillars. They evaluate the experience of being exposed to a message or an ad of some kind in 2 different ways on a second-by-second basis. So really taking those measurements as you are exposed to a piece of advertising. The last 2, and those are attention and affect, and I'll come back and describe those in a moment. The other 2 metrics are what we call outcome metrics, and they measure the net effect of perceptions of the brand as a result of exposure to the ad. And so these aren't second-by-second decompositions. They're actually measuring the net impact on the consumer. as a result of devoting, 6 to 30 seconds of their attention to this particular advertiser. And again, we don't use traditionally formulated research techniques. We use the most appropriate techniques to measure each of these areas. So in the area of attention, which is that ability to break through multi-sensory clutter, the ability to have your ad actually be noticed in a multi-screen viewing environment or in a pre-roll environment. How do I keep people watching the ad after they have an opportunity to scroll away from it? We actually do this. We measure attention through eye tracking. Using computer-based experiments, we actually measure not only how many people are watching an ad at every moment that it's playing, but also what they're actually looking at. It does us no good to create a very visually dense ad that gets 100% of people watching if they're not attending to what they're supposed to be watching in order to achieve maximum brand exposure and message communication. Similarly, we use facial action coding to determine whether an ad is making an affective connection. Is it creating an emotional response? Is it stirring my emotions? This is not as I think it was either Fortune or Barron's magazine about 10 years ago, heralded the emergence of sadvertising, where every advertiser was creating these tearjerker ads trying to make people cry, whether it was the Budweiser Golden Retriever with the ponies or whatever it happened to be. This is not really about triggering a specific emotion, but rather taking the viewer on an emotional journey. And the reason stirring emotions in advertising is so important is that the profoundness of my emotional response to viewing an ad is the key to ensuring long-term memory encoding of that ad. We tend to remember experiences that actually moved our emotions. This is why we can remember where we were on 9/11 or where we were when we got our first kiss, but we can't remember what we had for lunch 2 days ago. One was not a memorable experience. My emotions weren't stirred. It was simply a functional or utilitarian one, whereas the other experiences actually moved my emotions. And so affect decomposes an ad on a second by second basis and actually assesses what the depth of emotional response is to the narrative arc that's being shown in the ad, the story that's being told in the ad, essentially. And then these two outcome metrics, memory and desirability, measure the extent to which the brand and all of the desired attributes for the brand are encoding in long-term memory, not short-term memory. Traditional ad effectiveness measures ask either on an unaided or aided basis which advertisers you can remember being seen in the clutter reel of 3 or 4 spots you just saw. That's a measure of short-term memory, short-term memorability. Unfortunately, what we know from a neurological perspective is that our short-term memories tend to get flushed as soon as we move on to a new sensory experience, particularly an emotional one. So once the ad ends and I'm back to the program I was watching, or I'm on to the social content that I was really looking for, all of that short-term memory encoding gets flushed. And so what we use is implicit association testing to measure the long-term memory encoding and long-term memory of the brand and all of the attributes that are being communicated about the brand. And then ultimately, the objective for McCambley and other CMOs is to lift preference for the brand. And again, we use implicit association testing to measure 2 different dimensions of consumer preference. One is what we call the emotional appeal of the brand. Have we made the brand more emotionally appealing in consumers' eyes? The second is what we call self-identification, or you can think of that as a degree of personal attachment to the brand, irrational psychological attachment to the brand. The reason that we measure those 2 different dimensions of brand preference is we know from empirical validation that emotional appeal, that first metric I talked about, when combined with conscious preference, actually creates a model that has predictions that have the highest correlation to short-term sales lift in the marketplace. And this has been validated empirically across about 8 or 9 different verticals and different price points, different competitive strategies, different brands. The combination of implicit emotional brand appeal and conscious brand preference integrated together creates predictions that have the highest correlation to short-term sales lift. The other metric I talked about, which was self-identification or psychological attachment to a brand, actually, again, through empirical validation, has been demonstrated to have the highest correlation to loyalty behaviors. And loyalty behaviors manifest as a willingness to pay more for a brand, which McCambley is really interested in when he's positioning against bed-in-a-box brands and low-end entry-level mattresses from the traditional providers. Likelihood to buy a brand again and again and again, which again, in a multi-bed household, McCambley's also interested in, because people buy mattresses more than just for themselves. They buy them for their kids, for their other bedrooms, and so on. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, the likelihood to evangelize in a positive way about the brand. And again, if you're investing heavily in SEO and SEM, this kind of earned media through positive word of mouth is like manna from heaven. And so we look at those two different dimensions of the lift in brand preference as a result of exposure to the spot. And taken together, we're actually able to provide some pretty compelling guidance for the creation of effective TV ads. And so these ads that Joe produced, Joe's creative team produced, we were able to run through our system. And Joe can describe the experience of actually winnowing through the 4 different executions to identify which one was actually the winning one, and forming the basis now of their multi-year advertising campaign going forward.
Okay, Joe Sauer, I want to throw this out to the audience. Do we have any questions? We're running up on the time here in 10 minutes. We're coming up to the juicy part here with these great ads, but just want to quickly pause, see if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we'll just go in and we can show these ads, and no one's left, or it seems like everyone's still tuned in. So, anyone, any questions? Please chime in on chat or whatever, and we can, or just come off mute. Okay. All right. I don't see anyone. Proceed, Joe.
Okay. It's my turn, Joe Sauer.
Yeah.
So I think we all have an understanding of what makes an individual ad successful. And I usually think that there's 3 main components. One is, are you reaching the right audience? Right message, right person, right place, right time. Are you reaching the right audience? And online, if you're a direct-to-consumer brand, everybody has access to the same targeting tools. Anybody can bid on the term best mattress. Anybody can optimize their targeting with Google machine learning. Anybody can target lookalike audiences with Facebook. So there's no competitive advantages from a targeting standpoint for the most part online. The second thing is, what's your offer? Well, there's 200 brands right now offering mattresses, and we all tend to offer the same kind of discount, $200 off, or maybe, buy more, save more. If you spend a little bit more, you save a little bit more. So there's no competitive advantage where the offer is concerned. At least we haven't found one. And then the third facet of competitive advantage for an ad is your creative. And where we found, or what was most helpful to us as we were testing creative, is that as you look at this ad, for instance, we had 2 different campaigns we tested. One was meant to kind of create this dream world where when you're in a Saatva mattress, you've got this sleep sanctuary that you're in, and then when you get off the mattress, you go back to your real life. And we tried to make it contextually relevant with Google Hangouts, like in this ad and things like that. And these ads performed very well. And then we had another campaign that featured a couple, Emma and Dan. Emma was our research junkie. This is Emma here. And she's the one that does the deep dive research on mattresses, and her husband kind of represents everybody else in the world. He benefits from her deep research. And what I love about, I'll use this as the ad that I talk about. We all know that there is an arc to a story. Like I said before, boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love. Something drives them apart, and the emotion gets high. There's a resolution. So if you look at this story arc, you'll see that there's something grabs a person's attention at the beginning of the ad. There's a little bit of a product sell, right. If you look at her lower cheek there, and then the tension starts to build. And then there's a tragedy that kind of happens where she smashes the sandwich and it shocks people. And then there's a resolution and a denouement. That's the arc of a good story. And when we would compare the different arcs of the different ads that we were testing, we would often see that the arcs were off. And as you look at the different moments in an ad like this, you can say, okay, the person was disengaged at a point when we needed them to be engaged. If you're going to try to follow a good story arc, what can we do with these storyboards? Say we tested this in storyboard form. What do we do with this storyboard to revise the narrative so that we get them leaning in at the right times, we get them leaning away at the right times, that we have a climax at the right time, and then we have a denouement at the right time. And by following this kind of a methodology, I don't want to oversimplify things too much, but we found that this campaign, almost on the order of between 12 and 20x, outperformed the other. And it's hard to quantify what I mean by 20x, because when you advertise in the upper funnel, you expect that, okay, we're going to invest our money and it's going to take some time before these ads have an impact. Well, through this research and through the revisions of the story arc, we were able to see a return on our investment, a strong return on our investment within 30 days of starting to run these ads online. So this type of research, especially if you do it before you go into final production, can really have you understanding where the emotional connections are happening, whether your story arc is working. I mean, if you look at this ad where the resolution is very, very powerful at the end of this ad, and then there's a calm denouement, which you would want, dramatically improved our results.
What are your metrics for measuring effectiveness?
There's a few, and we've been tweaking those measurements, Dave. So when we first started running those ads, we were looking at return on ad spend. How much did we invest in YouTube? Can we track people from YouTube and do they buy our mattresses, and how much money comes into the company versus the spend that went out the door? And in the early days, what we found was that the return on ad spend was actually quite strong. I worry about using return on ad spend as a measurement for upper funnel advertising for a variety of reasons I won't go into, but I don't think it's an appropriate metric for upper funnel ad spend. And that's when we transition to looking at share of search. Do these ads increase branded search for Saatva related terms? And what we have found is that they have a very powerful force in search for us right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. And they're just really, really quickly, Dave, the reason I don't like ROAS or conversion rates is it can cause you to pull the plug too soon on a really powerful upper funnel ad. So knowing that there's a direct correlation between share of search and market share, I look at that as something that reflects the long-term nature of upper funnel advertising more accurately and keeps you from, that if you see an increase in share of search today, that maybe there's a 60 to 90-day lag. That gives you the patience you need to stick with the campaign. Whereas if you were just looking at ROAS, you might cut it off too quickly. At least that's what we've learned.
Yeah, super interesting. Let's see here. Any more questions out there from members of the audience? Now's the time to ask. I know we've gone over a lot of material. It's been very interesting, but we'd love to hear from you. Anybody has any questions for both Joes?
Could you play the winning ad, that last one?
Sure. Here we go.
Hey, Emma.
We need a mattress, right?
Yeah?
I've been doing a little research.
Little?
The Saatva Classic has 2 layers of springs that contour to your body.
Nice, but...
It has a 3-inch Euro pillow top, Dan.
Oh,
and it's half the price of retail.
But I just wanted to know about dinner.
Look at this premium quality. And it's half the price of retail stores.
So just in terms of ad results, certainly high level of engagement, but where this ad really did its work is in lifting those influence metrics, the long-term memory encoding and the lift in both brand preference as well as longer-term brand attachment. Did it through, very effective humor with two characters that are kind of polar opposites, but actually working really effectively together. And as Joe said, the story arc almost follows a novel, what you would see in a novel writing class, where, you grab people right away, you have some sort of tragedy that befalls them or some sort of anxiety or tension that gets created. You see them through the journey as they resolve that tension, and then you have this massive payoff at the end and a very quick denouement to get through the branding moments at the end.
It's a fun word to say, denouement.
It is. Great. Well, what we've done is try to compress about 18 months of hard work into about 45 minutes of summary. We probably haven't done it justice, but to the extent that there are any questions that do come up after you've had a chance to kind of cogitate on the discussion, please feel free to reach out to either Joe McCambley or myself, and we'd be happy to talk you through any or all of this in greater length.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to say thank you to both Joe Sauer and Joe McCambley. Thank you for a great discussion. There was a lot there, but I thought it was really interesting, and I appreciate you showing those examples. So it was great to see that. For myself, especially as a marketer, I found it super interesting, just to be honest about that. So I really love this. Anyway, anyone has any other questions on this, you can feel d.austin@salesforce, forward these questions on to either Joe. And if you want to continue the discussion or ask further questions, we have our Ask a CMO discussion group in our forum, in our digital community. If you can ask there, lots of people will be interested as well there. But thank you all. It has been a great discussion, and thank you guys, both of you, for your time today. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Hi, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.